and welcome to Between the Lines. I'm Shannon Bessie, and I'm here with Tracy Abramson, Esther Hatch, and Sarah Eden. And before we get started today, I want to give a quick shout out to a new novel that has just come out, A Proper Facade by Esther Hatch. Congratulations, Esther. We hope, whoa, look, we have a picture. We hope everybody will run out, buy it, read it, listen to it, and enjoy it. So we're excited. Today, we are going to be talking about something that, to one degree or another, every writer deals with. It is the dreaded writer's block. So I was thinking that maybe we should start with a loose definition. What exactly is writer's block and how does it manifest itself? Who'd like to tackle that one?
I think writer's block is one of those things that can sometimes feel hard to define. Like, you know it when it's happening, but describing it, because it can manifest itself in different ways. I think the way I tend to think of it is, for me, it's when writing becomes too heavy. Either I'm frustrated by it, or I don't know what's coming next, or I just don't want to do it. When it's feeling like a weight, that to me is when I either am in the midst of writer's block or, boy, it's coming, buckle up. So that's me, when it's a weight on me.
I would completely agree with that.
I feel like so often in movies and culture, you see writer's block as something where the author cannot write. And in my mind, before I became a writer, I thought that meant like, oh, they don't have ideas, or they don't, like they can't write. And now that I'm a writer, in fact, like I remember being asked about writer's block on my first or second book, and I was like, I don't believe in it. I don't think it's real. And I was so confident. I was like, you just have to sit down and write. Like, it's not a real thing. And now that I've been doing this a little bit longer, I realized, like, for me personally, and like from what Sarah said too, it sounds like this is not uncommon. It's not that you can't write, it's that you really, really don't want to. And you will do anything else but write. And it becomes one of those impossible tasks, like scheduling a doctor's appointment for me.
Right.
that it can be done. It just feels impossible because the desire isn't there.
It's kind of like, when you make, for those of you who make a to-do list, you've got that list and it's like there's always one thing that just keeps moving from one day to the next, to the next, to the next. It's that thing. It's that thing that you just don't want, you should do it first, but you just don't want to. But the other thing is that writers are great at procrastination, whether it's, picking up an extra tennis match, or baking, or watching a Hallmark movie, or organizing cabinets, or you name it. Like, games on the computer are not my friend if I am not in a good space on my, in a book. It's just not a good thing. So
what I think everybody is going to take out of this is, if you personally know an author and you have any inkling that they might have writer's block, you can basically get them to do anything in your house. They will come clean it from top to bottom. They will organize. Anything will happen if they get to avoid the writing, right?
Yep.
I probably won't clean your house.
I just like, I've never been that desperate.
That's where Esther draws the line. And the other thing too, I think for me, I find that a lot of times my two defaults are to clean or to bake. And I think one of the reasons is that for both of those, after I have put in 30 minutes, an hour, I have something to show for it. Whereas for me, writer's block means I am stuck on the same page forever and have nothing to show for my time. And that's a very frustrating feeling.
Yeah.
So I think part of our escapism is to get rid of the frustration as well. Okay, well, I imagine that there are as many helps for overcoming writer's block as there are writers. But what are some of the things that you personally do when the words just won't come?
Okay, so for me, I know those of you who've listened at all, you know, I ride on a treadmill, and usually getting back on the treadmill is one of my things. But if I'm really struggling, even that, it's like I should have 600 to 1,000 words at the end of an hour. And if all of a sudden I'm getting like 32 words, I'm like, okay, it's broken. I need to figure out how to fix it. It's usually, I find that I'm probably, something in my life is out of balance. Like, I just need to figure out, am I not spending enough time with family? Am I not spending enough time just taking a break? Am I juggling too many writing projects? So if it's really bad enough, I'm honestly probably going to do this very soon, is take one project I was working on and it just isn't flowing the way I like. I'll set it aside and start playing with another one. Even if I only do it for a week or two, at least I felt like I got something accomplished before I go back to the other one. And then I can read, it might give me the perspective and just distance that I need to get back into the other project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so kind of a timing thing. I know for me, I really have to sit back and analyze what is causing my writer's block. Am I just too tired to write? You know, if it's the end of the day or end of a busy week, or been traveling and you're dealing with time zone changes, just the physical exhaustion. My default usually is to just go watch something like a Hallmark movie, just to completely decompress, brain dead, you know. Maybe, and this one is a little bit harder, maybe it's because I've taken a wrong turn in my story.
Yeah.
And that one I really struggle with, because not only are you not enjoying the writing and not progressing, you have that sinking feeling of, I'm going to have to cut some of what I have already written and
Yep.
start over. And that actually happened to me recently. I just didn't want to get back to the computer, didn't want to. And I finally thought, why? And realized that the previous chapter had sent me in the wrong direction. So I had to cut the whole chapter, and it's really hard to feel like you're going backwards, but ultimately then you're able to move forwards more smoothly. And then, like Tracy said, sometimes we just do hit burnout in general, and we just have to take a step back and just kind of remove ourselves from the writing for a short period of time in order to recharge our batteries.
Yeah. I feel like I started my writing journey not believing in writer's block, and now I believe it happens to me every day. So one thing I try to tell myself is like, hey, like, don't be discouraged if you don't want to write. This is kind of your new normal. And it's not that I don't like writing, it's hard for me to start. And so usually, and I know what it is, it's about at the 300 word mark. I've found my groove. I'm into the story again. I'm enjoying it, because enjoyment is so important when you write. And so like, one thing I just tell myself is like, this is normal. Get through your first 300 words. And then like almost never is that as far as I go. So that's probably my biggest tip.
Right. Once you get that momentum going.
Yeah.
Keep going. Yeah. Okay, guys, this is gonna be the physics major in me coming out. I started out at university as a physics major. It's the objects in motion tend to stay in motion, and objects at rest tend to stay at rest. I think that applies to writing too. Before we've started working for the day, we're at zero momentum, and it's sometimes hard to get it started. But once we do, it's easier to keep going. Yeah. So, guys, my worlds have just collided.
So along with that, another trick like that just reminded me is that has helped me a ton is when I stop for the day to leave a note about what I'm starting on the next time. Because so often I come and I sit down and I go, okay, where am I? You know, so versus now I've got a little note that says, okay, in the next scene or continuing this conversation, this is going to be said. And it helps me just, somebody called it parking on the downhill. Park on the downhill. Yeah.
No, that's great. And I've started to stop in the middle of a scene rather than at the end, because if I'm facing a blank page for a new chapter, it's a lot harder than picking up halfway through the scene and finishing it.
I love it. So. Tracy and I taught a class together at a conference earlier this year. The title was "There's No Wrong Way to Write a Book." And it was all this kind of thing, like figuring out the tricks that work for you, whether it's leaving yourself a note at the end of your workday or stopping at a non-stopping point, as it were, so that you aren't starting over every single day. Walking on a treadmill because it helps get the brain flowing. Pulling in your love of quantum physics into your love of writing, whatever it might be. It's so crucial to figure out what some of those obstacles are, but also what helps you to get over them. In that class, I talked about what I often term as my crucial question. Before I start writing, whatever writing session I'm doing, I will answer the question, what am I excited about in terms of that day's writing or that day's work? And I found that just by identifying something I'm about to work on that I'm excited about, or I'm going to enjoy, like Esther said, having a degree of enjoyment is so helpful. That helps me get going. I think that's what starts to give me momentum, because the dread begins to be outweighed by something I'm looking forward to. And if I can't think of anything, and it happens sometimes, that tells me I need to seriously switch gears for a while. Maybe it's I'm going to research a topic in history that I haven't had time to look into for a while that day. Or maybe I'm going to go read a book I didn't have time to read, or watch a movie in the era I'm writing in. It's something else that I can legitimately be excited about, and it gets that momentum going. And once it does and the juices are flowing, it's easier to come back to what we were working on before. So that's one of my little tricks, is to literally write down something I'm excited about in that day's work session. And that helps get me going.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. Do you think that having a deadline, whether it's self-inflicted or whether you actually have one from the publisher, does that help or hinder your ability to get words down? Have you noticed whether there's more or less sessions of writer's block when you're under pressure?
I don't think I would ever finish a book if I didn't have a deadline for it. I really, truly don't know that I would. I remember a few books into my career not having a deadline for the first time in my life. And I'm like, I'm going to just enjoy it. I'm going to write for the fun of it without this pressure. And you know what happened is I just didn't write nearly as enough until I gave myself a deadline. And then it was like, oh, okay, I better get to work. So for me personally, it doesn't, the part of writer's block that makes you go do something else takes over if it doesn't have some sort of priority in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm similar. Like, I think I do better with the deadline as long as I can make it where it's reasonable. Like last year I had to write a book in a month, and that was stressful. And it kind of took me a while to recover from writing that quickly. I know, Sarah, you've had a few that you've written very, very quickly. And so I think that can kind of be a little taxing, but also if you have, a lot of people don't think about that you have a lot of overlapping deadlines. You have the deadline for what you're writing, then you have maybe an edit hits you and you have the deadline for that. And then you have maybe a proofread hits you and you have a deadline for that. And so when you start having those, I finally get to where I'm like, okay, what is the project? The only thing I'm going to work on today is this. I'm going to get it done. I'm going to get it off my list. And so for me, it's just not having my list so long that I can't handle the deadlines that are on it.
Right. Yeah, I used to really get a lot of, I don't know if motivation is the right word, maybe focus that would come from looming deadlines. I think I'm saying focus, but I mean panic. And panic for some reason is a motivator for me. So having those tremendously difficult to meet deadlines was helpful for a while until I started burning out. And then I didn't have the time built into my schedule to step back and say, what is out of balance? How do I fix this? I wasn't able to say, this weight is so heavy, I have to take a day and do something else, because there wasn't time. And so I finally, a couple of years ago, stepped back and said, this isn't sustainable. It's too much panic, not enough breathing room, and shifted that. So while I still have deadlines, because like Esther, I think I do need a schedule set so that my brain doesn't wander entirely. But like Tracy said, one that is actually doable gives me the right balance to where I I know if I don't do my work, I'm going to be in trouble, but I have room to do it in a way that's healthy. And that's been an important balance to learn.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're all at different phases of trying to learn that balance, right? The good, better, best, and the staying healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, and so it's a journey. But so in this journey and under these pressures, have you ever walked away from a manuscript because it was such a struggle to get the story down, and then gone back to it weeks, months, maybe even years later, and had a completely different experience with it? You kind of alluded to this already, Tracy. What changed, or what changes in that kind of situation?
So, I mean, honestly, the biggest one for me was the very first novel I actually wrote start to finish was, it sat for 20 years. I just didn't have the talent and the craft ability. Like I hadn't developed my writing skills to do what I needed to do with that story. So that became my Dream's Edge series. But I think for other projects, when they need a little space and time, sometimes it's like you'd mentioned, Sean, that maybe it's taken a wrong turn and I need to step back so I can get a little more perspective. Or the other thing is sometimes, like, it's an emotional journey that you take with your characters. And if everything's going really great and I need to write really not great, sometimes I don't want to be doing that right then. So I can start and like, I'm just going to go play with the beginning of a story that is still in the great stage before it gets to the not great. And then I'll wait until, I can kind of write off of my own emotions. Or the other thing is the opposite. Life is really a struggle. You've had something happen that has been, more emotionally taxing. Sometimes it's easier to write some of those more difficult challenges into our characters when we've had to deal with them more recently. So I think sometimes it's just our mindset needs to match where we are. And sometimes we're fine. We can do whatever comes. But I do think sometimes if we're struggling, maybe a little distance is a really healthy thing.
Yeah.
I actually have a manuscript that I started years ago. And it's a story I love. I'm excited to tell. I know how I would tell it. The idea of writing it is exciting. Like it's right there. But every time I sit down to work on it, say, okay, this is the time I'm going to write it. It only takes a couple of days and that weight is back and that writer's block is back. And it's just, I can't move forward with it. So that's one where at the moment when I come back to it, it hasn't changed. It's still deeply entrenched in that this isn't the right time to write it, or I'm not in the right space. I don't even know what exactly is getting in the way of it, but it's still sitting there. I'm excited to eventually write it, but I don't know when that will be. So I guess the takeaway there is sometimes it takes a long time for it to be the right time. You don't have to abandon the idea entirely, but be kind enough to yourself to set things aside if the timing just isn't right.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that because, I recently had a very similar experience where I felt like I should and could write a certain book, but the weight, it just wasn't right. It just wasn't right. And it's happened multiple times. And one of the books that I wrote many years ago, it was one of my earlier books, and I got about halfway through it. And then my family needed me. I had a couple of weddings and children who needed a little extra time. And so I literally just sort of walked away. And I went back to that manuscript 3 years later, picked it up, finished it. And when I submitted it, I asked my editor, I said, will you tell me if you can tell where the break was? And she couldn't. And that was when I realized it is possible to walk away from a manuscript and come back when the time is right and finish it. And so I think we do need to give ourselves grace to do that when we need to.
It's interesting hearing Tracy say that about her first book, that 20 years later it got published, because I'm like, that I have one. Just like that. So I think I've got about 10 more years to go, and maybe that one will come out. That's probably the only one that I open and I go, oh no. It was the book I learned on, love the story, love the characters, but like the writing is so hard to like try and fix. and it's not just the sentence structure level, it's all the levels of writing are just a little off on it. So that's something I have a lot of books that I put aside for a very different reason, in that I started them for an anthology and it was supposed to be novella or something. And then I fell in love with them so much and realized there was a lot more story to write. So like I'm writing one now that was started that way. I finished one recently that was started that way. So they sit for a year or two, but I feel like it was the opposite reason. It was like I liked them too much, or I felt like they needed more than what a novella could have given them. And so I have done that, and it's always fun when you get to go back and be like, I remember why I loved this one so much, and get to write it finally.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for being open, and we all wish that words just flowed flawlessly and seamlessly off our fingers, but they don't. And we love our work most of the time, except when writer's block hits. But you know, for those of you who enjoy reading, I would just like to leave you a challenge that if you read a book that makes a difference to you, that you love, go ahead and reach out to that author and let them know how much you appreciated the book, and it will make their day, because there are days when writing is hard. And so give them a good review, share the book with a friend, do something that will help lift that author, and then hopefully it will encourage the author to keep writing and giving us all more books to read. We hope you enjoy this episode and will join us again on our next episode of Between the Lines.